My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 34 years old and I live in Austin, Texas. 3 years ago, I thought I had lost everything that mattered to me. My marriage, my home, and even my dignity as a father. But if you had told me back then that the woman who walked out on me would one day watch my name appear on official corporate filings as the controlling partner of her fiancé's company, I would have told you that you were dreaming. This is the story of how silence became my greatest weapon, and how one merger changed everything. 8 years ago, my life was simple. I married Rebecca when we were both 26. We had a small wedding, a small apartment, and big dreams. She was ambitious and loud about what she wanted out of life. I was quieter, focused on building a solid foundation instead of creating an illusion of success. 2 years into our marriage, we had our daughter Lily. I remember holding her for the first time in that hospital room, whispering a promise to her. No matter what happens, I will always protect you. I worked long hours at a boutique private equity firm downtown. I wasn't a salesman. I analyzed numbers, evaluated distressed assets, and studied market inefficiencies. Rebecca used to tease me about it. "You spend more time with spreadsheets than with me," she'd say. But I believed quiet discipline and patience always paid off in the end. What I didn't realize was that Rebecca had already started measuring our marriage by a very different currency. It started small. A sigh over dinner. A subtle comment when our friends bought new cars. "Daniel, the Hendersons just bought a lake house." "Daniel, don't you want more for us?" She started spending more time with her college friend Vanessa, who had married into old money. Every time Rebecca returned from those dinners, her gaze on our modest home grew colder. I wasn't a partner yet. I was just a quiet analyst in her eyes. I kept working. What Rebecca didn't know was that I had been quietly building a private personal portfolio on the side, learning how small-cap corporate acquisitions worked. I didn't hide it. She had simply stopped asking me about my work a long time ago. She only cared about the size of the bi-weekly paycheck. Then came Marcus. Vanessa introduced Rebecca to Marcus at one of those high-society networking events. Marcus owned Harrow Logistics, a mid-sized freight and supply chain company. He wore tailored suits, drove foreign cars, and talked big about corporate expansion. To Rebecca, he was everything I was not. When I finally confronted her after finding messages she tried to hide, she didn't cry. She looked at me with a cold, almost relieved expression. "I want more than spreadsheets and waiting, Daniel. Marcus can give me the life I actually deserve." I wish I had noticed the signs earlier. But by the time the truth was out, the divorce moved at a terrifying speed. The court settlement was brutal. Rebecca fought for primary custody of Lily, claiming my long hours at the firm made me an unreliable full-time parent. She got the house, and she got primary custody. I was reduced to alternate weekends and court-ordered child support. I moved into a small, quiet apartment on the outer edge of the city. I won't pretend I was strong. There were nights I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the steering wheel, wondering if patience and loyalty were just euphemisms for weakness. Rebecca made sure to twist the knife every chance she got. Marcus took Lily to the private country club this weekend. She'd casually dropped during Friday handoffs. Marcus is looking into elite private schools for her. Every sentence was a calculated comparison. But even though I only had Lily on alternate weekends, I made a strict rule for myself. I would never let distance make me an absent father. Even if it meant driving across town during my lunch breaks or rearranging my entire work schedule, I made it a point to sit in the audience of every single school assembly, piano recital, and dance showcase. Rebecca and Marcus would sit front row, looking at me sitting a few rows back like I was a forgotten ghost from her past. I let them believe it. Instead of letting resentment consume me, I poured my focus into the one thing I knew best: valuation and market fundamentals. A year after the divorce, my private equity firm launched a strategic capital fund targeted at acquiring mismanaged, over-leveraged middle-market logistics companies. As a senior portfolio manager, I was tasked with running the market screening. That was when I saw the financials for Harrow Logistics, Marcus's company. I didn't seek it out for revenge. The data led me there. On the surface, Harrow Logistics looked thriving. Marcus was constantly doing press releases and acquiring shiny new fleet vehicles. But underneath, the corporate debt structure was a nightmare. He was bleeding cash, relying on high-interest merchant lines of credit to maintain his lavish corporate image. I brought the target analysis to my managing partners. I didn't make it personal. I presented pure, undeniable numbers. Harrow Logistics was prime for a takeover, and Marcus was on the verge of defaulting on his primary credit facility. Over the next 14 months, our fund quietly acquired his company's distressed debt and built a majority equity position through secondary share purchases. To clarify how the deal was structured, our private equity fund acquired the controlling 51% equity stake in Harrow Logistics. And because I was the lead managing partner heading this specific acquisition fund, I was officially designated as the controlling investor and board chairman on all regulatory filings. For over a year, I said nothing. I stayed polite at Lily's drop-offs. I listened in silence when Rebecca boasted about Marcus's upcoming corporate expansion deals. They thought Marcus was negotiating with a benevolent Wall Street fund that was coming to save his business. They had no idea that the fund's chairman was the man sitting 3 rows behind them in the school auditorium. The final acquisition docs were set to close the same week as Lily's spring piano recital. That night at the school, Rebecca turned back to me with a polished, condescending smile. "Marcus is closing his huge expansion deal this week, Daniel. It's nice that you still find time to come to these little events despite your job." I simply smiled back, nodded, and said, "I wouldn't miss Lily's performance for the world." 2 days later, the corporate filings went public. Harrow Logistics was officially restructured under our fund's controlling oversight. Marcus called me 45 minutes after the press release hit the wire. His voice was frantic, stripped of all its usual bravado. "Daniel, what is this? What did you do?" "I did my job, Marcus," I replied calmly. "Your balance sheet was unstable. Our fund bought the debt, converted the equity, and restructured the leadership. It's just business." The real confrontation didn't happen over the phone. It happened 3 days later in the main boardroom of Harrow Logistics. I walked into the corporate office wearing a tailored charcoal suit, flanked by our legal team and operating partners. Marcus was sitting at the end of the long mahogany conference table, visibly pale, staring at the agenda folder in front of him. For the first time since I had known him, he looked small. He didn't say a word. I took my seat at the head of the table as chairman. "Good morning, everyone," I said, opening the portfolio binder. "Let's review the operating budget for Q3. We have a lot of corrections to make." Marcus kept his title as founder, but his executive authority was completely stripped. Every expense over $5,000, every hiring decision, and every corporate strategy now required my direct signature. The illusion of his self-made empire dissolved in front of the entire board. The shift in Rebecca wasn't an instant movie drama. It was a slow, painful realization that unfolded over the following months. It started with the subtle things. She stopped making arrogant comments at drop-offs. Then, she started looking at me with a strange mix of confusion and hesitant respect. The man she had discarded as a boring spreadsheet analyst was now the one controlling the financial reality of her new household. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, during a school pickup, she walked up to my car while Lily was inside grabbing her backpack. "Did you do all of this just to get back at me?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, lacking all its old bite. I looked at her directly, completely at peace. "No, Rebecca. I did it because I'm good at my job. Building things takes time and discipline. It's a shame you never stayed long enough to see the result." She stood there in silence, unable to find a reply, as I rolled up my window. Winning in business was satisfying, but it was never the ultimate goal. The real victory was something money couldn't buy. A few months later, on a quiet Saturday evening, Lily and I were sitting in my living room. We had spent the entire afternoon building a complex wooden architecture model together on the floor. She leaned her head against my arm, tired, looking at the solid structure we had built piece by piece over several hours. "Dad?" she asked softly. "Yeah, sweetie?" "Mom told me last week that you run big companies now, but you always still come to every single one of my recitals." I looked down at her and smiled. "Nothing in this world is more important to me than being there for you, Lily." She hugged me tightly around the waist and whispered, "I'm really proud of you, Dad." In that quiet moment, with my daughter's arms wrapped around me, the last lingering embers of past pain completely disappeared. You don't need to shout to prove your worth. You don't need to wear flashy suits or boast about your future to be successful. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is simply taking the time to build something real, something that will outlast every storm. I lost a marriage, but I built a life, and in the end, that made all the difference.